Okay, so I think we will just get started here. My name is Sean Menard. I'm the City Councillor for Capital Ward, and we're here to discuss the proposal for Hawthorne that's been submitted, and really looking forward to a robust discussion around this one. I know the Community Association will speak, as well as the applicant, and city staff will be on board as well. I think I see Nader there as well, Nader Kadri, and others I know will join as we move along. So just looking forward to a good discussion here. One of the things I think that is important is to mention in this area is obviously it's a traditional main street, and plan to evolve over time. And, we want to see obviously that corridor develop. I know the area very well. I used to live just on Drummond, right behind this area, and know the streets in that area really well. And obviously we want to get applications right. And because this is multiple properties on the street base, this is going to be a really important development for what the future of Hawthorne looks like. And for one thing, that means for us, we need to ensure that we keep the requirements for ground floor commercial at this site. Obviously, something that we push for as a councillor's office in conjunction with Old Ottawa East Community Association to make sure that was maintained. I know the zoning for this part of Hawthorne was just updated to include that requirement last year. Old Ottawa East does have less commercial amenities than some other neighborhoods in our area, and so this change was really meant to help correct that piece where traditional main streets in Old Ottawa East weren't always mandated to put in some commercial. So certainly community association to push for that, and glad to see that change was made just last year. I know we've had a meeting with the developer as well around that issue. I think it also means that efforts need to be made to ensure a human scale development here, one that respectfully transitions to the residential behind it. And it means, we look at the type of form, setbacks, that sort of thing. For this to be an animated main street, we want active frontages. We need to encourage active transportation. The application's asking for, more parking than's required under the zoning for this site. And obviously we've mentioned that to the developer as well. And at minimum, some of the parking stalls proposed could be converted to house more people or more alternative types of transportation. So we want to make sure we address that as well. And I know there's other issues that will come up. We've already set the stage for more pedestrian friendly street in concert with the local community association through the successful motion to bury the hydro wires on Hawthorne during its upcoming renewal. And so really creating more space along Hawthorne for pedestrians, but also in this area that really allows for developments like this without losing a lot of housing space that would have been lost in the past had those hydro wires not been buried. And obviously they're not buried yet, and the construction still to take place on Hawthorne, but this is all in conjunction with that Greenfield Main Hawthorne large project. So it's really important we get all this correct this time around. We're also able to protect the north side of Hawthorne, again, in concert with the community, from being expropriated, demolished, and keep as vacant lands in perpetuity by the province to facilitate their current and future bridge reconstruction efforts. A lot has been done to ensure that Hawthorne's future as a vibrant traditional main street in Old Ottawa East is secured, and the application represents, I think, an important opportunity to build on and take advantage of that work. We do want to ensure that we are building community with applications like this. And not displacing it. I know there's members of the community that live in current housing there, and that means we want to see accommodations provided here for existing community members on site. Obviously, anti-displacement is an important theme in the new official plan. So I'm looking forward to hearing from community members tonight. Miles in our office is hosting this meeting. So Miles is going to be taking over the reins here and going to different speakers as we move along. I'll be listening in the background, but Miles will be taking comments and questions as we move along. So just wanted to say thank you all for attending. Really looking forward to the discussion, and obviously this is an important one we get right for this community. So Miles, over to you.
Thanks so much, Sean. Hey everybody, Miles from Capital Ward office. I work on planning and development files for the office and often help with facilitating meetings like this tonight. So we've got a pretty brief agenda. I'll just give you an overview of it. We're at the introduction part of the agenda right now. I'm going to briefly introduce people on this call. We have from our office, our ELS Summit as well, who is the liaison for the Old Ottawa East community in our office and also works on some planning files in concert with myself. We have John Bassey, who's the owner of this development here on the call, listening to hear feedback from the community. Scott Alain from FOTEN. I'll actually let the applicant team, I just realized there's quite a few of you, so why don't whoever I throw to first on the team can introduce the rest of the team. Beyond the applicant team, we also have John Dance here from the Community Association, who's going to be providing initial comments from a community association perspective. And we also have Nader Khatri, who's the planner on the file from city staff here, who's going to provide some comments on where we are within the planning process, the timeline overview, and also here to answer questions for folks in the community that have them. So I'm going to go to the applicant presentation, and then we're going to hear from the planner, from Nader, and then we'll hear from John Dance from the Community Association. And John, if you need to throw to somebody else in the planning committee for a supplemental comment, that's fine. And then we're going to go to an open floor Q&A session where folks can have their comments heard and ask questions to city staff or to the applicant directly. And then we'll just have some closing comments after that and say goodnight. So without further ado, I'm going to throw over to Scott. Should I throw over to you for the applicant presentation?
That's great. Thanks, Miles. Appreciate it. Kevin, if you could kindly share your screen. I understand you'll be bringing up the presentation from our end. Oh, perfect. Thank you. So just briefly to introduce our side as Miles set up for us. So I'm here today with Kevin Reed of RLA Architecture. He's an architect on the file. I'm also here with Brian Casagrande, who is a partner at FOTEN. Personally, I am a senior planner at FOTEN. I've been working on this file on the day-to-day. I'm also joined by John Bassey, the owner of the site, as was mentioned, and Kevin Fagan from GBPA Developments, who are essentially the company that constitutes the developer. So before I go into the presentation further, I just wanted to pass to Kevin to just introduce the company briefly.
Thank you, Scott. So as I've been introduced, my name is Kevin. I'm the project manager representing JBA Developments. We're a local real estate developer and construction manager here in the Ottawa area. As you can imagine, the JB and JBPA stands for John Bassey. If you're not familiar with John, he's a prominent member of the Ottawa construction industry, has been for the last 30 or 40 years. So you've probably seen his name posted on construction sites around the city. JBPA is the latest venture focusing on purpose-built rentals. And this is actually a sister building to one of our previously completed developments just around the corner on 28 Pretoria. So if you're interested in getting a feel for what we're trying to sort of recreate here on Hawthorne, there is an existing building just around the corner. So without taking up too much of our time, I'll pass it back to Scott.
Thank you, Kevin. So just before we get into this, I just want to kind of set you up with an appreciation for where we are in the process. So we're submitting a zoning bylaw amendment. That's the application that's currently in. Nader, who is the planner at the city, will give you a little bit more on process later in the presentation. But just so you can understand, what we're showing you today is what we submitted to the city. The city has gone through a reviewing process, and they're in the process of providing us comments, which we should receive very soon. We've also met, as the councillor noted, with their office to get some feedback there. And the third stream of input we're getting is from your group today. So a big part of this will be using your information to inform what our overall response is and how the project changes over time as we proceed. Going further, let's go to the next slide, and I'll also add a bit of context. I realize this is your neighborhood, you know it very well. I won't get into too much of the details that you might be familiar with. If it seems like I'm going too quick, let me know after and we can revisit anything. I just want to ensure there's a lot of time for dialogue after, and it's not just talking heads at you. So of course, this is the site context. You'll see it forms 3 parcels. It's the blue outlined area. On the northwest corner, you see some existing buildings. They're basically townhouses, as I'm particularly talking about on the site. Then if you look on the 2 east parcels, recently there were homes on those parcels, but they have since been removed from the site. Beyond that, the site's rectangular, it's flat, it's about 50 meters across on Hawthorne. As the councillor's office hinted, the hydro lines are currently above ground, but are expected to be buried as part of this process. And our intention is to coordinate with that as the project progresses. Thanks, that's great. Yeah, so you'll see that Hawthorne Avenue is considered an arterial road in the city. So these are roads that are key to moving people across the city. They typically have a little bit more of a transit load and vehicle load associated with them. As you're well aware, the Highway 417 is directly north of the site. If you look at the right-hand panel here, this is a bit of a transit network map. So this shows where the city prioritizes transit, where it wants to place transit as the city grows. You'll see the proximity to what's called the light blue line is a transit priority corridor. Essentially, it means that the city intends to improve the ease of movement for buses and the frequency of buses and things like that to help assign more transit movement. And this connects to the broader LRT framework. Next slide, please. So this is an overview. I'm going to leave it to Kevin Reed, the architect, to give you some of the more precise details. I just want you to appreciate why we're here today before going further. So as you can see from these renderings, this is a 6-story residential apartment building. We're looking at approximately 67 units right now. So there will be 42 1-bedroom and 25 2-bedroom. The building will be supported by a variety of amenity offerings. On the ground floor, it would be animated by a gym and a business center, and then private balconies would be interspersed throughout on the upper floors. The 6th story of the building will be stepped back from the front and rear. What that means is it just it slims in. So if you look on the renderings, you can see that above the 5th story, it kind of moves to a smaller floor plate. And lastly, in terms of vehicle parking, we're currently proposing 50 spaces, as well as bicycle storage and internal refuse storage. The garage access is just through a door. On this site plan, yeah, you can see it's on the west side of the building. It's designed to fit in with the building aesthetic and not obviously draw too much attention to itself. So when I started, I said we're here to amend the zoning bylaw. So what we're doing is called a minor zoning amendment, and that means that we're not changing the zone or introducing new uses. We're modifying the existing zone. So the zone we have here, it's called traditional Main Street. Hawthorne's considered a main street. We'll get into that shortly. And basically what that means is it's intended for a higher order of density. It's intended for active building frontages and a mixture of uses, and a wide range of uses, in fact, are permitted. So we're proposing two key changes. So the first one is the existing height is assigned at 14.5 meters, and we are proposing to raise this to 20 meters to accommodate the building height. The other part is the exception. So currently the exception is called 1839. That's just the number that it is. So we're changing it to a new exception to be numbered later in the process, which would do the following things. It would amend the front yard setback to 0.7 meters. This is with considering the building proximity to the front of the lot and the buried hydro wires. We're proposing to step back the building at the 5th story. Currently, the zoning asks you to step it back at the 4th story. And then we're reducing the rear yard setback a degree from 7.5 to 6.7. If you look at the south lot line, you can see how it kind of jogs a bit. So really the impact of reducing the setback is only for a portion of the actual overall lot. Kevin, if you could kindly just zoom out just to bring back this list, appreciate it. I mentioned the height, and then currently we're proposing residential uses at the ground floor, which requires a variance as well. I want to note that, again, there would be active glazing at the front door, so there would be a window in, windows in, there'd be lighting, and there would be a gym for the tenants, which would again create activity and interest along the streetscape. Next slide, please. So just quickly, I'll give you a high-level policy summary. So as I had hinted, this is designated as a Main Street corridor. You'll see this colorful schedule to the right hand states this. Generally speaking, in this part of the city, mid-rise buildings are permitted up to 9 stories, and that's unless a secondary plan says something else. So here a secondary plan says 6 stories is the maximum, so that's something that we're respecting. I just want to give a flavor for how this policy tends to work. And yeah, we'll just go to the next slide and I'll show you more precisely what I mean. So I'm sure you're all very familiar with your old Ottawa East secondary plan. It says 2022, that's because it was brought to the new official plan as part of the adoption. So generally very, very close to what you might have been familiar with through your community design planning exercise and what was approved. Basically, when all the new secondary plans were brought into the new official plan, sometimes they were just modified slightly or not at all, depending on the plan, to fit in with what the new official plan is saying. So on the west side of Hawthorne Avenue, Hawthorne Avenue west of Main Street, so where we're located, there's a target density of 150 dwelling units. And then this is the provision that I was pointing towards. So no buildings will be allowed higher than 6 stories and 20 meters. That's why we're proposing 20 meters as our zoning too. Other than other height limits assigned throughout the official plan, that's just the rest of the policy. It doesn't apply directly to this site. And this is another direction that we're looking at here. So it says to develop the south side of Hawthorne Avenue, which is what we're looking at here, alongside the traditional Main Street zoning, which we're keeping, and to step the building massing, which we've shown on our plan, to help transition to Graham Avenue, which is of course the street to the south, and that's designated as a neighborhood low rise. And just continuing on, this is now the architect's plans, so I will let them go through and present the remainder of this presentation, and look forward to your questions afterwards. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Just took me a second there to find the unmute button. Good evening, everyone. My name is Kevin Reed, and I'm with RLA Architecture. Some may know it as Rod Lahi Architects. And I'd like to say thank you to Miles and the group at the city, and to the counselor and to Scott for all of the information that we've seen already. And welcome all the public attendees and participants tonight. We're looking forward to addressing hopefully your concerns and answering your questions. So what we're looking at here are just some renderings of the building. You can see these views at the top of the page, 2 views from the street frontage of the building. Again, a 6-story building. You can see this 2-story tall red brick datum that refers to that existing context that we have towards the west. And then as you step up into the upper floors, levels 3 through 5, you've got these kind of lighter buff colored masonry frames that break up the scale of the building by kind of interspersing how they come forward, and then also injecting inset balconies into those, and then punctuating the spaces in between with a projected balcony. And we, some of you may notice one of the developments, there was a portion of the building towards the westernmost extent on this street fronting face that was kind of buff colored material, and it's been changed. That was on a recommendation from the Heritage Group. And these are views of that, the rear of the building. So I guess it'd be tough to get these views. You'd have to be looking through all the houses in the backyard, outbuildings of all those people living on Graham, but you would see maybe the upper reaches of these buildings if you get far back enough, say on the canal or places up towards Graham, towards the east. So moving along, just some more zoomed in views. Again, this is that street frontage from Hawthorne looking towards the east, and you see the large expanses of glazing, and then these kind of red clay masonry pilasters and this projected awning over top of those first two floors. And then the same frontage now switching around your view. So now you're looking towards the canal, towards the west, and you see that existing building just adjacent to the view there. Looking at the site plan, take you through, well, you heard the stats, but I guess to relive them, we're looking at a building proposed to be 20 meters high, 6 stories tall. As Scott had mentioned, the rear setback, it ranges. It's 6.7 at its easternmost extent, and then it gets up as much as 8.2 on the western side of that back edge. And then you have your parking entrance, your underground parking entrance at the north west corner of that ground floor of Hawthorne, and then your main entrance for your residential lobby in the center of the building. 67 units, 22 one-bedroom, 20 one-plus, 18 two-bedroom units, and 7 2+ units. So just taking a closer look at the plans. Start in the upper left-hand corner. This is the P2 level, so we're 2 levels below grade. And you can see we've got a kind of a collection of mechanical spaces, lockers, storage lockers, parking spaces. And then as we move up to the P1, we have more infrastructure that's required along that street frontage, electrical rooms, hydro vault, a cistern for stormwater capture, and then bike storage spaces, as well as a number of car spaces on this floor as well. And handling the garbage and recycling on that P1 level, so it's off of the street. And the ground floor, zooming in a bit there, as mentioned before, you could see to the west, we've got the underground parking entrance. We've got a gym directly east of that, a business center, and then the lobby. And then as you move towards further to the east, there's some residential units on that eastern street frontage, and then some larger units and kind of a back terrace area at the ground floor facing south. As we move up to the second floor, you can see it's a kind of a combination of 1 plus and 2 bedroom units, with the larger units having 2 aspects at the ends of the building. And then as we move up again to the next sheet of plans, levels 3 to 5, very similar to level 2, some slight variation in unit mix, but again, the larger units found at the ends of the building to the east and the west. And then as we move up to the 6th floor, you see that floor plate contract. It gets pulled back so that you get that kind of recessed setback at the building face and towards the south. And you get much larger units, 2-bedroom and 2+ study at that the 6th floor at the top. The mechanical penthouse above the 6th floor is an outdoor amenity space and a mechanical room up there. And then we just have a roof plan as our last plan in this set here. Just moving again to the elevations. As mentioned before, you could see that strong kind of 2-story reference with the red, reddish brown clay masonry, and then these kind of silver buff colored masonry frames on the street frontage. And then the system, I guess it's to be determined, probably be a panelized product upon the 6th floor. And a similar approach at the back of the building, there's that reinforcement of the 2-story datum with that red clay masonry. And then it's just a more of a contrasting element on the back of the building with that red masonry there. And same thing at the building ends. So towards the east, it's a combination of that red masonry and panelized product. And then 2 tones of masonry on that west elevation. And just kind of taking a look at, again, some of those products that are being proposed, used for the project. This is just kind of an annotated elevation, talking about the different systems. So punch windows, you've got a larger storefront system of glazing at the lower level, 2 levels. And then again, just reinforcing what those materials are. We go so far as to tell you what the preferred masonry products are. And then just moving along to the east and west elevations. Again, we see that metal panel system in combination with the Belden masonry. You probably noticed we're not trying to play a trick on you. They've just removed the color of the masonry in these, just so it's more of kind of a technical drawing for the annotation of the materials. And then taking a look at the shadow and sun study. So this is taking a look at the longest day of the year, the summer solstice. You can see at 8 a.m. that shadow is kind of cast towards the west and onto Hawthorne. And then by 9 a.m. it starts to move off of the street. And 10, it still moves further towards the center of the building. By 11, it's almost directly over the building. By noon, it is. And then as we move on through the day, the building doesn't produce a lot of shadow in contrast with its other buildings that it shares the site with. There is some shadowing that you see here as you get later in the day, around 5 o'clock, and then by 6 o'clock into those backyard areas, and then by 7 o'clock and 8 o'clock. Most of the buildings you have at that time of day are producing a lot of shadow. And then just moving towards a typical equinox. This would be September, which would be the same for March. You can see that you have longer shadows in those early parts of the day at a lower angle of the sun. And then by, say, about 10 or 11, the shadow moves back onto the street and centralizes on the building itself around noon again. And then you have the same effect as you move towards the latter part of the day. By 5 o'clock, you're casting a shadow because of the different chart of the sun. You're not casting the shadow into the backyards so much as you are just down the streets. And then by 6 p.m., you have that effect. And then looking at the winter solstice, which we just had the pleasure of experiencing. Not a lot of light anywhere in the city at 9 a.m. in the morning. It's a lot of shadow. And then as you move on into the mid part of the day, because the sun is low to the horizon, you still do have a lot of shadow cast from buildings on the south side of Hawthorne. And the condition remains the same. And then you get very kind of long shadows near the end of the day, that very short day of the year. And just moving along. So back again to some street views. This is just building that context view of that two-story datum of buildings kind of east and west. And you get a slightly taller building towards the corner there, and just reinforcing that material and level of building with that. Looking at some building sections. So this long section you see on the top here is cutting the building in length, looking towards the north. So you see the building core, those larger units towards the east and west. And then cut through the building from the backyard to the front yard, the street condition. You can see those kind of a top building face along the street frontage. And then the building, as it has a greater level of setback, and it's a varied level of setback at the towards the south, which is at the section left. You have those projected balconies facing south. And another street section, just reinforcing the 45-degree angular plane. So this is the zoning requirement. This is a pre-secondary plan, pre-rezoning, and then the angular plane proposed you see here in this green projected line above. I think that's the last slide. Can I give it back to you, Miles, or does anyone else want to?
Is there anybody else in the applicant team that wants to speak right now before we go over to the city planner?
I think that's all we have to share at this time. Of course, you'll hear more from us after the remainder of the speaking points. But yeah, that's all for us now. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Scott. Kevin. I'm going to throw over to Nader now from city staff, the planner for this file. Nader's going to give us an overview of the sort of timeline and planning process aspect of the application. Nader, go ahead.
Great, thanks, Miles. And I'm actually going to try to share my screen if possible, just so that I can bring up a timeline. So just maybe let me know.
Yeah, there you go. You've got it. Excellent.
And you can see the timeline. Perfect. Awesome. So for many of you, I'm relatively new to the city, and it's actually one of my first projects working within this area, but I am Nader Kadri. I'm a planner, and I'm working with various departments and agencies to sort of process this application from the city's perspective before we make a recommendation to Planning Committee and Council on the rezoning that's before us. So just before I get into the process piece, I do want to highlight here that the applicant has submitted what's called a zoning bylaw amendment. And if there were changes that were being proposed that were contrary to the official plan, which includes the Old Ottawa East Secondary Plan, the applicant would be required to submit an official plan amendment in tandem with the zoning bylaw amendment. That is not a requirement in this particular case. There are no changes that are required to the official plan to support the development as it stands today. So from a zoning bylaw amendment perspective, the applicant has submitted their application. The city has deemed it complete. The community did receive a community heads up email. There were signs that were posted on the property with my name on them. And then the application was circulated to various departments and agencies. And the circulation period has actually ended. We've received all comments on this application. I've heard from a number of the residents as well, and the community association with respect to the application. And so what we're doing right now is we're having the meeting tonight. Then we're compiling all the feedback that we've received. We're going to give that back to the applicant, and that will then inform changes to the built form and to the application that they will come in with another resubmission. And there could be a few rounds of sort of resubmissions and comments and feedback from staff until various technical matters are resolved. But once staff are in a position to make a recommendation on the zoning bylaw amendment, we will take a report to planning committee with our recommendations, and those recommendations will then filter onto council. If council, planning committee and council approve those recommendations, and there could be a passing of the bylaw that would support the application. But before the project could advance through to the construction stages, the applicant would be required to submit what is called a site plan control application with the city, which would then be processed, and signs would be posted as well. And then subsequent to that, a building permit application. And so as it stands now, we're just processing the zoning bylaw amendment application. We've not yet received a site plan application from the applicant. So that's pretty much it from my perspective. I'm here to help answer questions all throughout the evening. My contact details are up on the screen as well. Right now, I will paste them into the chat just so that everyone has them handy. But I have received a lot of feedback on this. All feedback received does form part of the public record and does make its way into the staff report that does make its way to planning committee and council. So just if there's something else that you'd like to share with me, feel free to email me all throughout the process, and I'm happy to have a chat at any point in time. All right, over to you, Miles.
Thanks so much, Nader. Okay, so we've got the next thing we're going to do is hear from our local community association. I have John Dance from the Planning Committee of the Old Ottawa East Community Association on the call. John, can we hear some initial comments from the Community Association perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Miles. Thanks for organizing this, and Councillor Menard, much appreciated, and Ariella. So this is really an important development for us because it sort of sets the precedent for what will happen on the rest of Hawthorne, and frankly, on much of Main Street. You know, we've been pretty successful so far in terms of having developers adhere to zoning and the secondary plan. So we're really concerned about what happens here, because for both the south and north side of Hawthorne, this is going to be really important. So I think that's pretty key to keep in mind. We, in fact, during the lengthy community design plan work, secondary plan, and we pushed the city to have the Hawthorne as a traditional Main Street. But one of the other things we pushed for was that it'd be 6 stories on the north side and four stories on the south side. And it took a long time before the 4-story was ever put into place through zoning, but it was. And we asked for that provision for the very clear reason that we did not want to overshadow the Hawthorne the Graham residents to the south. So I mean, that's a pretty sensitive thing, and this right off the bat, you're proposing six stories. Yeah, and I'm quite aware of what the secondary plan says, but you know, we wanted more density, a lot more density on Hawthorne, but we didn't want 6 stories on the south side. The next point I'd like to make is that where 6 stories are allowed on our traditional Main Street, you know, there is to be the step back, as was pointed out, above the 4th, not above the 5th. And, you know, right off the bat, we're asked for it to be above the 5th rather than above the 4th, and that doesn't work. What perhaps is equally bad is at the rear, where there's supposed to be this 45-degree angular plane where you have a 6-story building. It's not being adhered to in the proposal that we see in front of us. And indeed, you know, the way the angular plane is put inside, it goes to the edge of the balcony, which I don't think is quite right. It just makes that much more shadow towards those people who live on Graham. Third, and something that was quite important to us through the course of the CDP and secondary plan was what what our Main Street, our traditional Main Streets would look like. And we have this very unique provision whereby there is to be this 2-meter setback at the front. And here we're seeing a request for it being 0.7 meters. I mean, if we say, okay, that's fine, there are good reasons for doing that, then it's going to be 0.7 everywhere. We want 2-meter setback there, and that's what it should be. We want a vibrant Hawthorne, and I think the with the bearing of the cable, or excuse me, the hydro wires. Thank you, Councillor Menard, and the reworking of this and better sidewalks and so on. We can have it, but it's going to be, if we have this in essentially encroachment, a provision of a 0.7 setback rather than 2 meter setback, then it's going to impair what we want as a vibrant main street. Similarly, there's supposed to be 50% commercial for the new buildings along Hawthorne, and you're proposing 0%. It just doesn't work for us. We want Hawthorne to be vibrant. You think of what the city should be, is that we'll have Elgin as a vibrant street, which sort of becomes Hawthorne, which becomes Main, and all along of it should be this very vibrant street. But when you don't have commercial there, it's not going to be that. I guess those are my major points. I note, though, with some optimism that JB Holdings, what you did with the Pretoria, and you saved that massive tree in front of it. I think you must have stepped back your setback, excuse me, your apartment building there. I think you showed good understanding of what was important. So we hope there's also good understanding of what's important to the Old Ottawa East community here. Our secondary plan and what we tried to get through the community design plan are really important to us. We hope there's greater respect than what we see in the plans at the moment. Those are my comments. Miles, thank you very much for hosting this.
Thanks, John. Those are great comments. Thank you for voicing them. And we're now at the portion of the event where we're going to open the floor to questions, comments from anybody in the call. What I'm going to ask you to do is to please use the raise hand function. I know, folks, we've been doing Zoom for a while now, but maybe not everyone is familiar. So I just want to point out, and now I'm having trouble finding where the raise hand function is. It should be under reactions, I believe. But if you can't find the raise hand function, just let me know in the chat, and then I will call you out that way. But otherwise, please use the raise hand function. And okay, I see a couple hands up already. I see Paul Goodkey also from the Old Ottawa East Planning Committee. Please go ahead, Paul.
Yes, thanks, Miles. So John covered everything briefly. There was two things that I wanted to add. One is with regard to this 2 meter front yard setback. I'll tell you this, there is not one development on Main Street that hasn't complied with that provision. And that 2 meter front yard setback is to be able to expand the sidewalks such that there's room for people to linger in front of the shops. So there isn't, not even the subway. The subway is set back 3 meters, and it was built before the community design plan, the secondary plan, and the zoning. So I just want to say that's really, really important. And the other thing is a question, I guess, and I guess I should direct it to Natter. Natter, the right of way on Hawthorne is approximately 18 meters. The secondary plan, or the official plan, calls for the right of way to be protected of 20 meters. And I know what happened along Main Street. Anytime there was a development, the right of way to be protected along Main Street was protected by the city taking properties, taking slivers of front yard properties when there was a development, and or when there was the renewal of Main Street. But it couldn't happen everywhere. which is unfortunate. And you can see that our main street has problems getting a complete street at every section of it. So my question is, again, well, sort of twofold, but just, has that been looked at? Why hasn't half of the difference between 20 meters and 18 meters been expropriated at this property for this development? Was there any discussions of it? I brought this up during the Hawthorne main renewal, or the Hawthorne Elgin Greenfield renewal. And you can see from the drawings, you cannot get a cycle track on either side of Hawthorne with an 18-meter right of way. You need the 20-meter right of way. And it might take, I don't know, 10, 20, 30 years until all of the properties are set back enough that you can get the cycle track. I'll be long dead, that's for sure. But I think you have to take that that right of way such that it ends up being 20 meters eventually all along Hawthorne.
So I have a quick answer for you, Paul, on that piece. Okay, so typically with right-of-way protections, staff do take them as part of development applications. And so in this particular case, staff will protect what's listed within the official plan. And that's something that our transportation group typically comments on through the development review process.
Okay, so it's still in play. I just wonder if the developer knows about this situation.
I can speak to that if you would like, if now's a good time. I realize John had also mentioned the right of way and the front setback, so I appreciate that. So as you've correctly identified, it's a 20-meter right of way protection through the official plan. That's the previous one and the new one. So that was taken into consideration with our design. Like you also noted, it's 18 meters currently. So when we say 0.7, that's identifying that we're already giving away 1 meter. So basically the net there is 1.7. And the reason we're giving away 1 meter is because you convey 1 meter from each side. So to get from 18 to 20, take a meter from each side. So that's to kind of explain how we're not therefore encroaching. Well received your comment on the broader width of the right of way. That's something worth considering. One thing that we had noted is that we're still allowing for a 3-meter sidewalk because, as some may know, some may not know, the right of way allowance is from property line to property line. So it's not all road. A portion of that is also the sidewalk and the trees and, perhaps a cycle track or any street parking. So that's one thing that we considered, and what was appropriate was, will there still be room with for a sidewalk? And we measured out about 3 meters, about 4.4 meters from the front building wall to an actual roadway. So those are the numbers in play. We'll work with the city to see what's appropriate, but I hope that's helpful to answer some of those questions, and I'll let you continue from there.
No, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Paul, could I ask you to jump back in queue if you have a follow-up? I want to make sure we get to everyone. Thank you for that question and comment. Again, well said and good points raised there. The next person I have in queue here, and I'm sorry if I get this wrong, I'm just reading off your username. It looks like Yankee. Is that? Please correct me on that.
That's a much more intriguing name than Ian Kirk. I like it.
Okay. Please go ahead with your question.
Okay, I have 3. Hopefully I don't overstay my welcome. We noticed on the other plan, not shown tonight, but the other plan that we scoped, the ground floor from floor to floor is 4 meters or 13 feet. This would create a 12-foot interior ceiling height. And given that most of the floor is residential, not commercial as requested, why is so much height required?
Did you
Want to ask all three questions actually, Ian? And,
yeah, they're related. Okay.
Okay.
The next question is the floor to floor height on floors 2 to 6 is indicated at 3 meters or 10 feet. This will create an interior ceiling height of 9 feet. Quite typically, ceiling spaces in apartments are 8 feet. The mechanical penthouse is shown as 3 meters in height as well, 10 feet. Third question. If the floor were reduced to from 3.3 to 2.7, typical 2.7, building height would come down to 2.4 meters, 8 feet. I think the ceiling heights have been made higher purely to make it more marketable, I'm guessing. Nice, but not necessarily. It exacerbates the intrusion that it will have on our property on Graham Avenue. And I've done some very rough math, and I'm instead of the, I think 58 feet, or they're about 60 feet, we're actually looking at a building that's 81 feet. So I suggest that characterizing this 6 stories, 4 stories, a little bit fatuous. It's actually a very tall building, even with 6 stories, given the elevated or ceiling heights on all of the floors, including the bottom floor. Now, the building could be reduced in heights if it were standard apartment size ceiling. Any comments on that?
Thanks,
Sure.
Ian.
Do you want me to take that, Miles, or?
Yeah, please go ahead. And if other
Yeah.
people on the applicant team want to speak to it, they can do so as well.
Great. Thanks for your question, Ian, or question 3 parts there. So maybe to start with your last question first, actually, the way that the height is listed for the buildings, residential buildings in the city of Ottawa, will always be taken from the top of the roof assembly that is above the highest residential floor. So in this case, if it's 6 stories, the height is given from that roof assembly above that 6th residential floor. So you're right, like there is part of the building, what's called a permitted projection, like a mechanical penthouse, an elevator overrun, that kind of stuff that runs past the last residential floor. And you're right, there's building there, but it doesn't get calculated into the maximum height that your application is in for. To go back to your previous questions or observations about floor to floor heights, it's most likely a building of this type would be a non-combustible construction. It would be a concrete floor system, concrete superstructure. And then what you'd have most of the time with residential units these days is most of the units will have their own mechanical systems serving each unit internal to the unit. So a lot of what that means is you've got ductwork and plumbing and services internal to the unit, and all that stuff is located below the concrete slab. So you're right, like the 3+ meters floor to floor for levels 2 to 6. It does sound like a lot, but after you you include, say, 200 to 250 millimeters of depth for your structure, and then you start building up all your mechanical systems. And then for a lot of buildings these days, we enclose the mechanical systems in drop ceilings and bulkheads. It does take away headspace. And you're right, like we are trying to make good, livable, marketable environments for people to live in, while also conforming to height restrictions and applications. Lastly, the observation about the ground floor. It's typically the case in the urban context that the city is also looking for us to have additional height on the main floor. This is the most prominent aspect of the building in terms of its experience, both internally and at the street level. So it's usually the case here that if you've got symbolic spaces or spaces used for amenity or commercial, then you do need that additional height as well. Most of the mechanical systems at the ground floor are closer to their actual branch lines. So you have a lot of large, large open spaces that are served by mechanical down there. And it's usually the case that we're looking for additional height there to produce, prominent, kind of well experienced and a building face that is on par with that civic engagement. So we usually do find additional height at grade. Hopefully that answers some of your questions.
Yeah, so the trade-off would be we're not going to be listening to individual window-mounted air conditioners if there's a central HVAC system.
It's not a John Bassey thing. The window-mounted AC units. It's definitely a bit of a throwback, I think.
Okay, so the mechanicals in the above the ceiling are taking care of air conditioning and heating.
Yeah, like a lot of units will a lot of the times will use heat pump systems that are actually located in the unit. So whether they're like vertically arranged inside the unit and then they're pulling air and then they're exhausting air to the building face. So each unit is kind of handling its own system.
Sorry, I snuck in a fourth question. Forgive.
Oh yeah.
That's okay, and thank you for those excellent questions. It was something on my mind as well, given the 20 meters could accommodate 6 stories with ground floor commercial. Why were we seeing 20 meters here, 6 stories without the commercial? And I think Kevin, you gave a great answer, so thanks for that. Next on the speakers list, I have Francine. Francine, please go ahead.
I think you're muted, Francine.
Okay. Hi. Thank you very much for hosting this tonight. I really appreciate it. And thank you for everyone coming out. Now, David and I, my husband is here. We live immediately at 13 Graham. So it's immediately in the backyard at the most narrow point one of the most narrow points that meets the backyard. So where you're asking for that setback to be shrunk. So needless to say, it will impact our quality of life significantly. But before I get into that and I ask my questions, I'd like to invite John Bassey to actually show himself, with all due respect. He is about to change the quality of our life significantly, and I really appreciate that we want to have more housing. You don't know me personally, but I've been an environmentalist and a housing advocate for decades. So you can call me NIMBY if you want to, but you don't know.
Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Hope you're well.
Thank you, John. I really appreciate that. I think it's
not a problem. That's why I'm here. I'm out of the city, but obviously this is important. So I'm sitting here and obviously I take everything to heart, and I understand it's a sensitive topic. So we are here to try to make it work, and I have no issues with you calling me personally if you have to, and when the project starts, and we will go through it. And when we're all said and done, we'll have a glass of wine together.
Happily, John, you provide the wine. So thank you very
No
much.
problem.
I appreciate it very much. So I have a few questions. So let's just look at the mechanical piece. So if the mechanical, what is in the mechanical penthouse? Maybe that was partly answered. That's requiring it to be so large. So a lot of mechanical components seem to be accommodated in the parking levels. So the elevator machine rooms would only require a small portion of what's shown in the plan. So the question is, are the developers thinking of a party room, washrooms, anything up there? Next question is the roof deck in the southeast and southwest corners should be pulled back from the south roof hedge, so people on the roof cannot look directly down on the private backyards of our Graham Avenue residents. And then the parkade vent shown in the southwest corner of the site is very close to the south properties. Is this an exhaust or an intake? If it's the exhaust, it could be noisy and polluting for neighbors. So that's a bit of an issue, but I'm trying not to make this personal, but I am freaking offended by the lack of respect for the secondary plan that people of the community worked on for so long. And that states very clearly, as I believe Paul did mention earlier, that it is to remain at 4 stories. Any development on Hawthorne should be at 4 stories on the south side to respect the neighbors, many of whom have been here for decades, and have respected the community, have contributed to the community, have continue to do so, and respect property by having beautiful gardens and creating an environmental space that is friendly for all. So it is, in my opinion, unfair to ask us, because just look at the shadow studies that you illustrated just a few minutes ago. We have a living fence of cedar trees, as does our neighbor to the west of us. There is much more mature than ours. And immediately behind us have a beautiful oak mature tree and a beautiful, I think it's a maple, I'm not sure. But these trees provide tremendous benefit in cooling the area, as we know, because we're in a bit of an asphalt jungle, and it's going to be even getting worse with this development. And, you know, obviously you're showing some small shrubs or trees or something there, but I find it really difficult to believe that those will be successful in any way. So in a holistic sense, as much as you're filling a gap, not an affordable gap, but a gap for creating housing for people, and I know how critical that is, and I support political parties that try to advocate and create conditions for that to improve. I find it disrespectful to consider to go to 6 floors. And I know you probably paid for $4 or $5 million for the property, so you have all of the demands upon you with interest rates and supply demand. I understand. I'm in business. I understand ROI, profit and loss. Got it. But at what cost to the neighborhood, to the community? And yeah, sure, there's maybe only 6 or 7 houses that are directly impacted. Many of those are rentals, three houses, 3 apartments in them, 4 apartments in them. What would be wrong with them? You know, ideally the missing middle is what would have gone in there. So at least restrain to 4 stories. At least if you're going to do 6 stories, which, well, then you might as well buy my house first. Then you can do a setback at the 4th story, not the 5th. I have a lot more, but I'm going to save that for a letter to Nader Kadri.
Thanks, Francine. Those were some,
Any of those. You can get my emotion, but yeah, that's the way it is. That's life.
thanks for those comments and some questions in there too. Who on the applicant team is wanting to provide some comment first?
Well, Scott, if you could address the height, from 4 to 6 of what the zoning, the secondary plan. So if Francine could just appreciate why we're making this application for that, if you could address that. And then the other comments, if she wants to send to myself or to Nader, and then we'll address it when we regroup, like we had said at the beginning of the meeting.
Yeah, no problem. And after that, I'll point you to Kevin for some of the questions about venting and things like that. But thank you, Francine. Appreciate your local knowledge on this. Just to first start with the question about the mechanical penthouse. Well, I'll leave it to Kevin to explain what's in there. I just want to tell you that from a zoning and process perspective, it would be impossible for us to, in your words, pull a fast one, just because the way the zoning is phrased is we would have to go through the public process itself to request any rooftop amenity area. And in fact, if we put a party room up there, it would therefore be defined as a story in the zoning bylaw, which would then mean it's a story in the secondary plan, which would then mean we need an official plan amendment, all of which is a process that's not worthwhile for our approach here, and just also not something that you could do without public consultation, without the normal processes. I'm sure Nader can confirm. In terms of the building transition, we're very much obviously responding to policy. We're eager to hear some of the feedback from the city to see how we can find a successful approach. We're responding to policy as well in the secondary plan in terms of what it asks us to do as far as our requirements for transition. On a broad sense, we have to make it acceptable. City staff has to agree that our rationale, our case for our approach is suitable. That's one of the tests, and that's something that we've put into consideration. The angular plane, which John Dans had also noted and is an important tool in assessing urban design, has been considered. It is not something that we need to or are asking for permission to break. It is used as a guideline, so it's a reference point, and it's something that we're using as a tool. So in terms of the zoning, you're correct. We are modifying the zoning there, or proposing to do so. In terms of the secondary plan, we're basically using the tests it's given us, and there's more on this in our rationale, and I'm happy to go through them in a bit more detail. But essentially, we've provided a response for how we meet these tests, because we're not trying to change what the tests are currently. So that's how we came to our planning opinion, and that's basically where we land on that. I'll pass it to Kevin if he wants to talk about the penthouse or the venting at all. Thank you.
Sorry, Kevin, before you go, do you mind if I just quickly jump in from
Go ahead.
perspective? So just to highlight really quickly that although the secondary plan does support a 6-story building on the site, the process of a rezoning application is to sculpt that 6-story form. So the applicant's sort of taken a first stab at this right now. We have not given them comments back on this yet, but we intend to. And a lot of the comments that will be given back to the applicant will be on how to sculpt that 6-story form so that it better responds to the criteria within the secondary plan, which does speak to a transition to the residences on Graham Ave, but also about how you create that robust public realm on Hawthorne. So I just want to make that very clear to everyone on the call that it's okay to talk about sculpting at this stage, because that's the whole process, right, that we're engaged in at the moment. Sorry, Kevin, you can
No,
go ahead.
Thanks. Great comments. Thanks, Francine. And I'm sorry, I forget your partner's name, but yeah. Hi, guys. Beautiful street. I love Graham. The observations were good. There's a louver at the rear of the building, but that's typically where we intake the air for the building. And then we exhaust to the street. So you wouldn't have to worry about buildup of those kind of fumes coming towards you. The other question you had about what goes in the mechanical rooms in the basement. Well, that's typically where you would have. Sorry?
Yeah, on the roof, Kevin. Why the
I thought
mechanical? The allowable
she'd asked
projection's quite
both.
wide. Yeah.
So for the roof, you would have a lot of large mechanical and electrical systems that are handling all the common areas throughout the building, not necessarily the place, not the actual small heat pumps that are tempering each of the units, but you'd have, makeup air units, you'd have your generator up there, a lot of equipment that is serving the larger building as a whole. As well, you've got a lot of pumps that are handling mechanical systems. They're located up there, and there's a fire suppression system in the building. So we've got kind of water intake rooms in the cistern, which is handling stormwater retention in the basement. And there's a lot of equipment, kind of building-wide infrastructure that goes at the very bottom and at the very top. And in the middle, you've got all the residential units. So hopefully that answers some of your questions.
Thank you.
Thanks for that, Kevin, and thanks, Francine, for the comments and for the questions. I'm going to move down our list now, and folks, if you have other questions that come up as we're going along, it's okay to jump back in queue, and we can, time permitting, we will get to all of them. If we do run out of time, please email us, and we will get answers for you from the applicant team or the city planner or from us. Okay. Sean Wilson, I see you up next. Please go ahead.
Sean spelled correctly. I just want to point that out there.
Okay, well, that's personal now at the office.
I think I might be the youngest person, well, besides her, on this call right now. Like, I feel like it's the development team, the people working at the city that are at my age group. It's kind of funny. Yeah. Anyways, I want to say thank you for, I guess, the effort that's been put in so far. I thought that was a pretty good presentation, very informative. It's actually my first time like going through this process and like reading up on it and like the zoning laws and stuff like that. And actually, I kind of like this public consultation in one sense, because it's very educational for the public, I thought, in terms of how much work you guys have to do. And it's crazy that every one of these projects needs to do this. On the flip side, going through the zoning, I've now learned how restrictive it is. It's crazy, the rules, and some of the rules, it blows my mind, right? Like I was looking up like parking, like minimum requirements in that area. It's like 0.5 or something per unit. And in that forces them to have to put in a whole additional floor and stuff like that. That's just dedicated to cars and whatnot. So it's crazy, some of the rules that we impose, let alone like when it comes to height and you know, like all these things, what do they affect in the end? It's like a bottom line of cost. And in the end, like, I don't know, if you don't have a car, you save 10 grand a year. Like, you know, there's lots of studies that kind of show it. So I don't know, if they wanted to change the amount of parking spots, I'd definitely say 100% yes. Yeah. As a young person, I do have to say that I know I'm happy to see additional units in my neighborhood. Like I'm not sure you guys know about the rental rates here, but it actually is kind of crazy like right now. And to see, you know, 67 more units being put in place of, it's like what, 5 or 6? It's I don't know, it's I think it's a step in the right direction. I do know that I guess there is a little bit of controversy, and to be honest, I know like some things are kind of hard, like you know, there's definitely the not in my backyard ism that occurs. And I guess with the not in the backyard thing, it's like, it's tough because I know, I guess people, change, right? I don't know. I know there's always that expression that comes in my head. It's like the only constant is change, right? But change can also be really hard in a lot of sense when it comes to shadows and whatnot. Like I know even in my own property, my neighbor wanted me to cut down my tree because it's grown over the past 5 years to now cover up the and create a shadow upon her room or living room at a certain time of the day. And like, I don't know, it's one of those things that, I don't know, it's at least with shadows, if I look at a building's height, I see it impacting maybe an hour, 2 hours most.
Sean, where do you live, Sean?
I live
Sorry,
up.
folks, let's not do questioning of each other here.
Yeah.
You can go ahead and answer that, but please let's not interject when folks are speaking, and we're not questioning each other on the call. We're asking questions to the presentation, the presenters.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Anyways, I guess at least it's on the north side, like, right? So at least it's minimizing the shadows that's going to be at least happening for the people on the south side of the street. There's only so much you can ask for, right?
Can you correct that, please?
Yeah, and then when
south side.
it's the buildings being built on the north side compared to the residents that are on the south side that would be affected by the shadows. That's what I was kind of thinking of. When it comes to, I guess, the frontage, to be honest, I really don't know about what's the right solution. But like, I don't know, can't you just push the building back an extra 1.5 meters and get rid of some of this backyard space that's required? I'm not sure if that is a solution. Like, if you want to say the one side, why not just push it back the other? When it comes to height, I don't see why we have that restriction in terms of like they want to just bring it up basically one floor. It seems pretty minimal. I know it's increasing the amount of units that are being there. I'm kind of for that. If I had I guess I know end the call, I'm actually kind of different than the rest of anybody that would ever comment a call. So I'm not a friend to anybody here, besides maybe the developers.
Empathy, Sean. Empathy.
Yeah.
Folks, I'm gonna have to mute the call if we keep getting crosstalk and interjections. I understand folks don't agree with the current speaker, perhaps. I'm not saying I do, but please. In fact, I don't. But Sean, why don't you please go ahead, and folks, please don't interject further.
It's I guess maybe I'm naive too, like, who knows, but it's one of those things that I don't know. I'm glad to see additional units being put in place. I don't know, I'm glad to see developments occurring and people putting money and investments into growing the neighborhood and allowing like me to have a chance to potentially buy a property in this neighborhood, because I currently cannot afford the current rates. So I'm going to end it on kind of like a weird note that I'm kind of for this development. I know that a lot of people here are probably more on the opposite end of the foot, that they're like, well, not next to me, but I don't know. I guess in my future, someone's going to try to build something next to me, and I just have to not be a hypocrite when that occurs, because I'm not for this or something. So okay, yeah, that's how I'm going to end it. I guess I don't know. It's I guess I don't really have any questions. Do you have any questions, Vita? Oh, yeah.
Okay. All right, Sean, thanks for that. Just a note for future questioners, please try to keep it respectful. There was some suggestions that maybe other folks on this call were being hypocrites. Let's try to stay away from that language moving forward, but I appreciate the feedback. Does the applicant team want to comment?
But Miles,
on that,
can
or
I
can
just
we move forward?
Miles, can I suggest that maybe, given it's 8:23, and I think there are a lot of people who still want to comment, that maybe there should be a time limit on people's comments?
Okay, I'm going to try to keep tight, remind folks to wrap it up if they're continuing on. That's my apologies. Maybe I should have been doing that already. Also,
Miles, it's John Bassey. Quick question. I mean, I could stay here till 2 a.m. It doesn't matter to me. It's obviously important for me, and obviously for the people affected in the community. How long do you have this slotted for?
So we're slotted for 2 hours. So we have 36 minutes left. We have 6 hands raised. So I think we're actually doing okay right now. I
Okay,
think
good.
we will finish in time, but I don't know who is speaking because their name is a number on the screen, but I will try to make sure we are policing
It
how
was
Just do like-
Diane.
Sorry?
Am I the number? Okay.
Yes,
It
you're
was
the number.
Diane. I was wondering who that number was. I don't know
It's
why I'm
you.
the number. Okay, okay.
Mystery solved. Thanks, Diane. Okay, let's move along just in the interest of time. I see Dan Byrne next up in my queue. Please go ahead, Dan.
Sure. Yeah, Dan Byrne. I'm one of the residents of the building now. I live at 18 Hawthorne. I have 3 kind of comments and or questions. First one is just like the most probably just question about the nature of the build, but I pull into our driveway every day and I pull out onto Hawthorne. It's really, really busy. And it's quite terrifying actually sometimes in the winter when the snowbanks are high. And I'm learning a little bit about the width of the entrance exit into the driveway and the 50 cars coming off of Pretoria, coming across Pretoria Bridge or coming down Colonel By. It gets busy. And that's my biggest concern for the project as far as that goes. As far as the design of the project, it's just, I don't know if there's been a traffic study done or the impact of that with all the other construction going on around and the redesign of Hawthorne and everything. But just that's the part that terrifies me most about the project is I pull in and out of Hawthorne. It's hard. And to actually move the driveway, my driveway is on the opposite side of the buildings. To move the driveway closer to the Pretoria Bridge to be on that corner, that scares me actually about how dangerous that might be for pedestrians. If the sight line is really not that great, because already when we put that fence out in front of the empty lot, I had to take slats out of the fence because with the fence going right up to the road, there was no sight line for pedestrians or oncoming traffic. So that's my biggest concern for the design, just for the safety of whoever will be living there in the future. So I don't know if that could take a comment. I'll say my other 2 comments first, and then people can respond. My second bigger concern would be the density of units and the design of the units. Yeah, I like Sean who just spoke. Like, I'm happy that we're increasing density in the city. That's why we live downtown, and so we have access, walking distance to every place, nearby. I totally get. I work with low-income people in the city. I'm a pastor. I work with people on the streets, low-income people. I work with a lot of young people who are trying to find places to rent. So I don't actually have, to go from 4 units that are really in right now affected to 67, I can see where there would be like, oh, great. My concern is that I have a family of 5. And actually, because I've worked with a lot of people downtown, what I do know is so many people live multifamily in units. And the average 1-bedroom apartment in Ottawa right now is actually more than I pay for rent right now. And so though we've increased the number of units from 4 to 67, the number of units suitable for a larger family actually now are taken off the market, causing it even that much more difficult to find affordable housing for a family. Old Ottawa East has always had a family character to it. We have a lot of students. I could see this place being very suitable for students. Ottawa U, obviously, 5-minute walk away. But Ottawa East has always been like it's a very kind of family-ish community. And that was my concern with the new build too, is I didn't see any like units that would be suitable for a larger family. I think a 2 plus a den is the largest unit in it. So that's my bigger concern for there. And then the personal concern obviously is this is kind of putting me, our family, the people we've hosted in our house, our neighbors who also are hosting an extra person in their house. And John, who's lived here I think John's lived here for 15 some years, it's putting the residents of the building, obviously, we are just kind of trying to figure out thank you for the person from the city who said like what the timeline was as far as what has to happen next. But obviously our family's concern is what is the actual possible timeline of when in the process do we, for example, get our eviction notice? Is it after the zoning thing is approved? Is it after the site plan is approved? Like, when will we hear when we need to move? How much time, lapse will be there? And I guess what other accommodations are made for the people living in the building? It concerns my family the most because I have a large family and I'm terrified to try and to find in this market a home that would be suitable for us. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Dan. Can we get comment from the applicant team?
Miles, can I respond to that?
Please, John.
First of all, I appreciate his comments, and as the landlord, obviously, we will be given ample time, more than what's suggested by the bylaw. Soon as we have a better indication of obviously comments and going through the zoning and the site plan, when we get closer to a definite date, we will reach out individually. I do sympathize with this particular, I apologize. Is his name John?
It's Dan.
Dan.
I'm Dan.
Sorry, Dan. I sympathize with him with the 5 people and the way the market is, but as the previous person spoke, if we don't build and get more units, supply and demand, prices of rental products are just going to keep going up. So for him, a house is, he's stuck in a situation where there's going to be, it's expensive. Hopefully more product gets into the system and the rental rates could ease up a little bit. Hopefully I'm not playing economics here, but that's what it's at. But I am more than happy to work with Dan and see if I have something else in my portfolio to accommodate him or the other tenants, obviously, or get back into the building. This building has more 2 bedrooms than the one we built down the street. A lot of people, we had a lot of 1 bedrooms and a few 2s when we were building the Marbella. And I'm proud in saying that our product is a good product. And, I want to have that clientele and demographics. We heard a lot of phone calls of people selling their houses in the glebe, empty nesters, and wanted a 2-bedroom. Maybe there's a demand for a few 3 bedrooms, but, that's where we're at. We provided a few more 2s, maybe a few more 3s is possible, but we could look at that as well.
Yeah, and John, you'll recall we brought up the large dwelling unit requirement and under the new OP in our conversations, and it sounds like Dan might need a bit more space than that, but we also raised at the outset of the meeting our hope that accommodations are made for existing tenants. That's something we're looking for. So thanks for answering that question directly, John. Appreciate that. Dan, thanks for posing those questions and comments. The next person I have here is our numerical friend, who's Diane. Please go ahead.
I don't know why it's come up as a number rather than my name. Anyway, thank you. As the person who suggested time limits on people, I'll try to be brief. I have a few comments and a few questions. And up front, I'll note that I am a member of the Old Ottawa East Planning Committee. So I sit on the committee with John Dance, who you all heard from earlier, and I do not live on Graham. So my first few comments, picking up on what John Dance said and what a couple of other people have said. The thing about the height, I'm having trouble getting my mind around this, and I don't expect an answer tonight, but I'm trying to understand how the Old Ottawa East secondary plan allows 6 stories on Hawthorne, but it still assumes 14.5 meters high. And there's a big difference between 14.5 meters and 20 meters. And so it seems to me obvious that if the secondary plan allows 6 stories, but the bylaws say the height restriction is 14.5 meters, then you must be able to build a 6-story apartment building within that 14.5 meters. So I'm still trying to wrap my mind around those numbers, and I'm not sure I heard an explanation tonight that I totally understood. The other thing, rear yard setback. I know John talked about the front yard setback, the Hawthorne setback. I'm not sure if he mentioned the rear yard setback, but I know Francine, as a Graham resident, raised it. As I said, I'm not a Graham resident, but I think the rear yard setback is extremely important, and I really believe it must be respected. And in my own mind, in this particular case, the rear yard setback is even more important than the front yard setback because it's the rear yard where neighbors will be most impacted. The other comment, and I think Dan made this comment, is about the traffic. And this is something that our planning committee actually did talk about when we were talking among ourselves about this development, concern about the traffic. As Dan said, the traffic, especially during rush hour, if you try to get across Pretoria Bridge, down Hawthorne, down Main, it takes forever sometimes. And I just don't see, with the number of parking spaces you're talking about there for residents of the apartment building, how those residents are going to get in and out on Hawthorne when they're going to work and coming home from work, which is both during rush hour. I believe there should be parking spaces, absolutely, but I would question the number of parking spaces. In terms of questions, someone from the developers team, it might have been you, Scott, mentioned the development on Pretoria. I've walked past that building a few times. I haven't actually bothered to count the number of stories or think about how many meters it takes up of the street. My sense is, though, that it's smaller bulk-wise, and I'm concerned about bulk, the amount of space something takes up. Bulk-wise, it seems to me to be smaller than what you're proposing, and I'm wondering if that's in fact the case. And if it is the case, why would you not build something more like that on Hawthorne rather than what is going to be, in my mind, something that is very, very bulky? Another question, the trees in the architect, and sorry, I forget your name, in the plans that he showed, there seem to be trees at both the front on Hawthorne and the back in the rear yard. I think landscaping, especially with something this bulky, I think landscaping both back and front will be extremely important. So I would hope that a lot of attention would be paid to the landscaping and that there would be trees. And in fact, those trees would be planted in the ground, in soil, and enough density of soil, that's the wrong word, but enough soil that trees could actually thrive. And no offense to people from the city, but unlike so many of the trees that the city plants on streetscapes where they're surrounded by pavement. So I would hope that there would be a landscaping plan, like I said, for both front and back that would help relieve the feeling of bulk of the building. Final question about the ground floor. John mentioned the planning committee's interest in commercial on the ground floor. I think that is very important. And I'm just wondering what you mean by a business center in the context of an apartment building and Hawthorne Street. I have a hard time understanding what a business center would be and why you would have a business center. I also wonder how you can think that anyone would actually want to live on the ground floor on Hawthorne. And so I don't quite understand the logic. I can understand a gym on the ground floor, but units on the ground floor and business center, that I don't quite get. And I think that would be ripe for turning into commercial. My last is a comment of principle, I guess. This whole idea of NIMBY, and the expression has been raised at least a couple of times tonight. It unfortunately has very negative connotations. When people use the term NIMBY, they mean it in a negative way. And literally speaking, not in my backyard. I think people who live in an area have every right as members of the community to be directly concerned and have a direct say in what happens in their community. And that's whether it's people who were objecting to Lansdowne, who lived in the Glebe and Old Ottawa South, whether that's us here in Old Ottawa East, looking at developments that are going up, people out in Canada who were worried about the golf course. No matter where you live in the city, you have a right to be concerned, like I said, about the immediate community around you, about your neighborhood, and we should all stop using the term NIMBY and using it in such a negative way.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Diane. Yeah, I really appreciate you saying that. People should have a say over their built environment, 100%.
Yeah.
And the NIMBY-YIMBY false dichotomy is not helpful, and it's
Yeah.
not helpful to use
It's
pejoratives
very
anyways,
negative.
so I
And
really
it's kind of
appreciate you
offensive.
saying that. Let's move to comment now from the
Sure.
applicant team.
Yeah, I expect maybe others might chime in, but I just wanted to kind of knock off a couple of the broader issues here. I appreciate you bringing up the transportation question again, because Dan had raised that and we didn't get the chance to respond. So I appreciate the local knowledge on the access. That's certainly something that will be considered. For the purpose of the zoning amendment application, what's called a scoped transportation study was required and submitted to the city, obviously prepared by a transportation engineer, and the city's engineers will be responsible for reviewing that and making sure things like turning distances are acceptable, viewpoints, things like that. And it's for reasons like that we've consolidated the one parking garage the way we've shown. In terms of the number of parking spaces, that's a popular question, of course, and there's obviously a degree of balance. For example, if the parking supply is too low, there's concerns of spillover parking into the community. That's something that's supposed to be mitigated, right? It should be entirely confined to the site. And then there's the concern of over providing with regard to simply the amount of vehicles coming and going. One thing that if the transportation engineer was here, and I expect when we come back in future discussions for the site plan control application, when we're looking at this with a fine-tooth comb, we'll bring them, is that typically in urban settings, when you have, say, 50 cars in the parking lot, that doesn't necessarily guarantee 50 trips every morning. It's typical that the basis for people moving into communities like these is because they prioritize things like walking and transit, and therefore might not be using their car on a daily basis for things like work. And then working from home is another reason why people may not be taking trips immediately every morning. I could speak as somebody who lives in an urban area and owns a vehicle, has a space for it, and it comes out on weekends for things like grocery or pet obligations. Some people have childcare or elder care obligations or hobbies that require vehicles. So the expectation here is not necessarily that we're creating 50 new trips. I believe the transportation study should be available for your review if you want to look at how the numbers were calculated. If not, it will be soon. So that's the transportation question. Regarding the planting, as part of the site plan application, which, like I said, is kind of the fine-tooth comb that we have to go through before we can build, they require what's called a landscape plan, which is prepared by a licensed landscape architect. And basically they have to select all the plantings, and they have the expertise to know what are appropriate resilient plants for the climate, what the critical root zones are, and what we'll actually plant. There's a desire to have some good substantial foliage, particularly in the rear yard, to ease with the transition. That's one thing we considered with our plan. So that landscape plan, which will come before we can do anything on the site, will also be reviewed by the city, and we'll have to pass their test on whether what we're doing will be resilient and appropriate. So that's the landscape component. In terms of comparing this to Victoria, they are similar. They're both 6-story structures. They're both kind of along the same scale in a lot of matters. Just for reference, if it helps, I also worked on the Pretoria project with John Bassey when that was going through. And a nuance with that is the first story in the rear yard was actually at 3.7 meters. And then it steps back for 5 to 6. So we've taken a different approach here that has more green at the base. Other than that, they're quite similar, like the John has noted. In terms of the business center, that's a good question. I don't know if maybe the developer wants to comment on it, but my view is it kind of fits into the work from home movement and would be for things like
exactly, Scott. It was well receptive from the tenants, where during COVID we created a room, we called it the business center, that had tables and kind of cubicles and a printer and free Wi-Fi, and people were going down there and doing their Zoom calls and working from there, basically just to get out of the apartment, I guess. And it went very well. So they liked that idea, and we're just trying to duplicate that.
Thanks, John. And forgive me if I've missed one of your points. If so, just let me know in the chat. But I hope that I answered your questions on this.
Scott, would you mind if I just take 1 minute to try and respond to the planning and the zoning comments?
Oh, certainly. Yeah,
started? Sure. In my experience, and I don't remember how the old Ottawa East planning and zoning sort of played out back in the day, but what happens is, obviously when a secondary plan comes through, there's a zoning bylaw in place. So one of two things happens after a secondary plan is done. The city either chooses to amend their zoning to try and bring it up and align it with the secondary plan direction, or they choose to leave it alone. And if they do the former and they don't fully bring it up to, the maximum height that's prescribed in the secondary plan, usually the reason for that is they sort of set a base, and then the rest is sort of a test based on how well the design qualifies to sort of get to the rest of the height, if you will. If they choose to leave it alone, it's simply because they're shifting that heavy lifting down the road, and consultants like ourselves and the city planners get to try and now wrestle with moving these applications through that then attempt to align with that policy framework. So I don't know which it was in this case, but regardless, the policy sets the parameters upon which these applications are to be evaluated. And so as planners, we sort of pick these files up, we look at the policy direction, we advise our clients, we advise the architect, we work towards a solution, and then we bring applications into the city and hope that we've designed it right so that at the end of the day, they feel it complies with the policy direction. I hope that helps.
Thanks, Brian. And thanks to our questioner. Josh Rackless, I have you up next. Please go ahead.
Okay, I've got a couple of quick questions that sort of have come from the community with me, and then I'll just give a couple of personal thoughts. Question one, the developers are already asking for a relaxation of the south side setback, creating very minimal spacing to the neighbors to the south. At the very least, the fully projecting private balconies on the south side of the proposed building could be recessed or semi-recessed into the building face. So that's one. And then the second question, the drawings indicate the parkade extending under the property to a point very close to the south property line. A very shallow planter is shown along this property line. There will be no possibility of big trees as shown on the drawings that will grow in 18 inches of soil. Therefore, there will be no trees to provide any privacy for the Graham Avenue property owners. So that's comment two. And then one thing I noticed when you were showing the roof, I'm like, why not make that a green roof? Just is it possible to sort of put a green layer on there that could be better for the environment, maybe attract some bees or birds to the area, or be nicer to look at. And then finally, yeah, my question is just what happened, like why isn't there commercial space at the bottom? Like even hearing about the business center, I understand that people like to get out of their apartments, but right now we've got sort of nice old buildings with a kind of a lot of grass and everything, and we're replacing it with just a big block that doesn't contribute anything to the community. It's just, you know, a big square with more units in it. So, you know, if we could have some commercial space, it would be nice. We've already lost the Royal Oak pub that was a gathering space. I know a lot of people go to Happy Goat on Main Street with their laptops and work. So if there was a commercial space, even a coffee shop down there that everybody in the neighborhood could go to with their laptops, at least it serves that purpose. And then it's also a gathering space. I was an actor in the Live Apartments recently where they were filming a movie, and I just noticed they had a little restaurant at the bottom, and it was just a gathering space for people in the building and the neighborhood. And it would add so much. And I feel like if there was just some kind of commercial space down there, at least it's like, okay, we're losing our beautiful grass and the old buildings, but it's something that the community can benefit from. It's not just a big square block that makes it like any dead space street anywhere around here. So yeah, those are the I guess my 4 comments.
Thanks, Josh. Does the applicant team have comment there, or?
Just a response, maybe. Those we appreciate those. They're very constructive. And speaking as somebody who worked with John Bassi on Pretoria, the project that was approved had some, you know, very positive changes from the project that was originally proposed. So that's something we'll take back. We still need to consolidate with the city comments and have a huddle to see what works for our next submission. But we will be before you folks again, certainly for planning committee, but ideally before and also with the site plan application. So we'll keep you updated with changes as they come to the building. Thanks.
Oh, and just one last thought. I just thought, like, I mean, since we're doing this building, and I guess you guys don't own all the land, but it would be interesting if there was a master plan for the block, kind of like what they did where they tore down Honest Ed's in Toronto and they rebuilt the block. We're like, okay, here's seating, here's coffee shops, here's ice cream shops, here's a little parquet, like just some vision for what this street is going to be. Because now it just seems like, okay, we're putting up a big block, and then when we tear down the other house, there'll be another big block, and then it's just kind of it just doesn't add anything to the community. It's just, you know, some blocks facing the highway. So be interesting.
Thanks. Thanks, Josh. Yeah. I think we somewhat approximate that with the community plan, the secondary plan, and the Hawthorne renewal should hopefully be taking some of the context, broader context in as well, one hopes. I'm going to move now to Joseph, and then we have Phyllis, and then Paul's going to join us for another question. I'll just note we are 8 minutes out from our estimated time of ending the meeting, so please try to be as concise as possible. Go ahead, Joseph.
Hi, thanks. I guess I'll keep this short. I just wanted to echo some of Diane's comments and some of the other people that also talked about. Personally, I think it's really stupid in this case to not include a commercial first floor. Like, it's a very kind of short-sighted decision, because the whole rest of Hawthorne is shaping up to be more and more a commercial first floor. We oftentimes go to furry friends. So I actually live on Rosemere. I have a dog. We take him to furry friends often. Yeah, walking down Hawthorne, I sometimes get a little bit envious of how much commercial there is built up compared to Maine, especially Maine south of Green Door. And it's something that I wish this new development would continue. I also understand the use for the business center. I've been working from home now for the past 6 years. And it was quite a challenge before COVID. And so I can totally see the advantage of having a business center type concept. And I think it's really cool that you guys are proposing that for the tenants. But I would like to point out that's something that everybody else in the neighborhood could have also benefited from. Same for a gym in the neighborhood. I'd like to remind you that the only gym in the neighborhood now that Peja closes gym is LBR, which is personal training only, as far as I know, and it's quite expensive at that. And otherwise, there's nowhere to actually use the gym other than crossing to Lansdowne or driving to Mavati, because let's face it, you cannot walk to Mavati on train yards, and it's very hard to take transit there. We actually end up having to take transit to the west end to go to a gym there. I also wanted to comment that the green roof idea was a really good one. And I think at the end of the day, we should also, I'd also like to appreciate that we're here talking about modifications to a building that, you know, we're not talking about, no, we don't want to build a 6-story building. We're talking about maybe not this 6-story building exactly as is. personally, I think that for me, the highlight here is that we're adding more units to Old Ottawa East. It's great to be able to see more people be able to come and live in our neighborhood. I'm a young person on this call too, Sean. I'm only 30. And I think it's really important that we have more supply in the neighborhood. And again, like the only way we can keep prices down for rentals and for buying is to have more supply and to allow more people to come live in this neighborhood and benefit from having walkable spaces. But I totally get the frustration and angst of having it right up against your backyard. And I just wanted to point out that, yeah, like, you know, more supply is important and that it would be, I think, really essential to have the commercial first floor to kind of bridge Graham. Yeah. And I think that is, that's it for me.
Okay, if I could
Thanks,
respond
Joseph.
to that.
Yeah.
Please, John, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll make it quick too. Listen, I appreciate the comment of the community, you know, requesting or at least participating in the gym. We'll definitely look at that. The commercial aspect obviously has been reiterated a few times, and as per our pre-meeting, so we will definitely look at that. The reason why I originally didn't have it was purely economics, because the retail market, if you drive up and down Bank Street and all those new buildings that were being built, all you see is for lease, for lease, for lease, and they're not really staying long. There's a high turnover. So for economics and purely pro forma, it made sense to put the apartments. But like we said, and like Scott says, let's hear the comments and see what we could do to make everybody happy.
I know we shouldn't dive back into this. I just want to say you're totally right. And that is something that has happened. I feel like part of it too is the way the neighborhood gets built up. Sometimes these things happen a little bit backwards, where the commercial's available, but the demand isn't there yet. I wonder if we couldn't have flexible space where, you know, it's currently in use for the building, but could be made commercial later. I know that's hard whenever you commit to it being residential up front, but I do wonder if there isn't room there to create kind of, you know, for tenants only at first and then opening up to the neighborhood if it really is successful.
That's possible. That's a good point.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Joseph. Thanks, John. Okay, so Phyllis, I have you up next, please.
Hi, I just have really two quick comments or questions. I guess one is, I think, and I don't think it was actually mentioned today, but I think I remember reading that the number of bike spaces is like 35 or 34 or something, like 50%. I think it's whatever the rule is, 50% of the number of units. And I just think that's woefully inadequate. And I also don't really get why you need the 50 car spaces, which I think must be higher than the required amount. I just think the balance is wrong there. I think you're living in an area where you're close to Queen Elizabeth, you're close to Colonel By, you're close to the complete street on Main. You've got lots of biking options close by and walking options. So I get also, yes, people need cars, but have you thought as well about perhaps putting in a communal car, something like that within the building for residents? Like, I just wonder about all the cars, and having lived in this neighborhood a very long time, I also completely understand the concerns about traffic on Hawthorne and getting in and out of there. And there still will be parking allowed on the south side of Hawthorne, which is going to even complicate site more. So that's all for me.
Thanks, Phyllis. Those are great comments. And I'm glad you raised them. Is somebody from the applicant team want to comment on maybe the parking issue, for example, or some of the other issues that Phyllis has raised?
Scott, can you comment on just the numbers that were allowed, and then I'll comment on the reasoning why we're doing that?
Yeah, certainly. So first I'll speak on the requirement for car parking. And so it's 0.5 spaces after the first 12 units. Therefore, it's 28 required for residents. We're proposing 44. And then for visitors, it's 0.1 per unit minus the first 12. So you need 6, and we're providing 6. So that's a total of 50. Your intuition is correct. We are providing additional spots by about 16 based on the 34 requirement for these numbers. And then for bicycle parking, again, you're on the money. So 0.5 per unit. So that's 34. We're proposing 36. And I'll leave it to John to comment as he asked.
Well, to the comment on the parking, the demand for the people renting, even though it was in the glebe just down the street, that when we just finished, Marbella, out of the 48 units that we built, there must have been at least 35 of those 48 apartments that was requesting parking. So people still want to have a vehicle. So we are trying to accommodate as best we can. I do respect the comments, though, that we are in the glebe and we do like them to participate. We'll look at that number again. And as Councillor Menard mentioned, maybe we could give up a spot or two for more bicycle storage. We'll look at that and we'll get back to everyone after we get all the comments in.
Thank you so much. And I've got the last speaker was the same as our first speaker. So we've come full circle. Paul, please go ahead and we'll wrap it up after you.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out to everybody that's looking at this that they should look at the Old Ottawa East Community Design Plan dated August 2011. This is what informed the secondary plan, but it's got more information in it. So if you look at page 33, you'll see traditional Main Street building envelope, Main Street Echo to Springhurst. Whoops, I'm on the wrong page, sorry. Hawthorne is on page 34. If you look at the images there, they call translucent forms. If you take a look at Hawthorne, you'll see a six-story building, six-story buildings on the north side. On the south side, you don't see six-story buildings. You see the existing height, okay? So right at the very beginning, Sean said something about, oh, the zoning just got changed such that it's 14.5 meter height limit. Well, actually, that height limit was changed way back when they changed all of the traditional main streets in the city. So it goes back at least as far as 2015, and it's the city's bungling that it didn't come out until just recently. So that's the Hawthorne. The other thing is to take a look at page 31. Take a look at the targets. So the targets for Hawthorne are 150 dwelling units. Secondary plan still says 150 dwelling units. So that's a stretch of six-story buildings on the north side, and that's looking like a stretch of if this goes ahead, this is a stretch of six-story dwelling units on the south side. That's like way, way, way in excess of 150 dwelling unit target. And then finally, go to the page 30, where it says the front yard setback shall be 2 meters except, and there's some places where it's except. Well, it's because they've already provided much more than 2 meters. So those are key for Natter, for the developer, for everybody to look at. It's not just what's the policy of the secondary plan. Go back and see what the vision was. And there's some specific points that you should look at. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Paul. I don't know if a comment is warranted from the applicant team. Do folks feel like they want to provide response for Paul, or should we? I'd
like to hear a response. It has.
Well, you've heard it from Paul. He wants to get a response.
Have these planners looked at these, the community design plan, because there's information in there.
Fair enough.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Paul, thank you for your insight on this, and I appreciate your comments. Certainly the zoning, you're right, is for 4 stories. That being said, typically the opportunity for a zoning bylaw amendment is it adds to the overall timeline and the amount of determination the community has in the process. So were it to be a 4-story building, it could be constructed as of right in the zoning and without the need for a zoning bylaw amendment, which would mean that it wouldn't go before council and it wouldn't go before planning committee. So the way the zoning is designed is so if somebody's going to then say, okay, I want to proceed with 6 stories as defined in the secondary plan, because I believe I can justify it based on these policies, then they now have the extra protection that, okay, well, you'll have to defend them to the planning committee and you'll have to defend them to council. And so I think that's part of the approach with the zoning. I don't want to put words into the mouths of the planners and the community who designed it that way, but that would be my reading based on how it's happened with planning and zoning in the past. The other consideration, just in terms of the north side of Hawthorne Avenue, from what I understand from speaking with the councillors, there's some concerns about expropriation, limiting the depth of those lots or eliminating them. And there's also the presence of the park, which also add to some constraints on the ability to provide appropriate lots along the entire row. That would essentially form a 6-story row. Perhaps there's opportunities to make 6 stories work in a different form along there. But all that to be said, I appreciate your comments and thanks. That's all for me.
Okay, Scott, thank you very much. And thank you everyone on this call for quite a robust discussion, frankly. There's a lot of planning expertise in this community in Old Ottawa East, folks like Paul Goodkey, John Dance, and Diane, that bring a wealth of experience, frankly. And I hope folks are listening on this call and the residents speaking to their concerns as well. I know you've heard from our office as well. Sean spoke at the outset of the meeting. He's juggling some childcare things as well tonight while listening to the call. That there's a lot that I think needs to change here. We want to see a development here. We want to see Hawthorne renewed, but we're going to need to see some changes here to make this, I think, workable. So, and thanks to the applicant team for presenting and for John for being here directly. We don't always have the owner of a lot show up to consultations. So genuinely, thank you. We appreciate it when the owner is here as well to hear directly from the affected residents. I think that's all I have to say before we wrap up tonight. John, I saw you unmute mute your mic. Is there anything you wanted to add before we?
I wanted to thank you, and I want to thank everybody for coming. I know it's a sensitive topic, and I understand it is their homes, and that's why I'm on the call, and I want to work with everyone. And obviously it is economics as well, but hopefully we'll hear the comments and see what we can do to make everybody happy.
Excellent. Okay. Appreciate that. Thanks everyone. Sean saying thanks in the chat. Have a great night. Thanks again for coming.
Thanks, Miles.
Thanks, everyone.